Down here. Gonna, for those of you, you might want to fix the back of your hair. That's going to be about it. But it's like I don't want to, I like this. I like this. So we're closing out the book of Joshua this morning. Let's go through the quick history of it, so we all bring it up to speed as we close it all out. The children of Israel were in Egypt. They had been there almost 400 years. They eventually, through the whole Pharaoh, Moses, let my people go thing, they march out. They get eventually they get to the promised land. They send the spies in. The spies come back, 10 of them with a bad report, 2 of them with a good report. The only 2 with a good report are Joshua and Caleb. So because of the good report, they had been 40 days scouting out the promised land. And so part of the judgment, because they did not trust God, was that they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years. So Israel wanders around and goes in circles for 40 years. Everybody at the age of 20 over dies off. They come then to the Jordan River to cross into Jordan after they had been 40 years in the wilderness. 2 guys, Joshua and Caleb, are the only 2 who came out of that situation in Egypt. They're the older guys in the group. And over again, we've seen a number of times where it said Joshua was old. Well, this morning we're going to see as he closes it out, he's 110 years old and he's going to die. And so we've talked about that. The ground that they came into has been all divided up. This is what it looks like now. All of the tribes have their land. And that brings us to chapter 24. So in Joshua chapter 24, here's what it says. The end. I'm going to jump. You know how you read like the last chapter of a book? Okay, so I'm going to read the last chapter first. Joshua dismisses the people, each to their own inheritance. So they all go to that area. That's where this thing concludes, is everybody goes to the area that God had given them. So at Joshua chapter 24 and verse 1, here's what it says. Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. Now, Shechem is a very important place, and we're going to talk about the significance of that in a minute. But there's a reason he gathers here. It says he summons the elders, the leaders, the judges, the officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord your God of Israel says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, they lived in the Euphrates, and they worshipped other gods." Joshua basically looks at them and he says, let's talk a little bit about your history. He said, when we go all the way back in the history of you as a people, here's what you need to remember. You guys have spent a lot of time worshiping the wrong God. And he goes through and basically gives Israel their history about how they have continually pursued other gods. And that's important to our story, because the most famous verse that we're going to get to this morning, that you know from Joshua, you've got to understand there's a whole prefix before all of this saying, look, this is what it needs to be all about. And so what happens is he goes through the history, and he eventually comes to this, and he says this. So I gave you, let me back this up a second. In verses 5 through 7, it's interesting. It shifts. Because what happens is Joshua says, this is what your ancestor did. This is what your ancestor did. This is what your ancestor did. And then at about 5, 6, 7, he changes it and he starts using a personal pronoun, you. He says, now let's talk about you. This is what you did. And so now he's coming to it, and verse 13 he says this. So I gave you land which you did not toil, and cities which you did not build. And you live in them. And you eat from vineyards and olive groves that you didn't plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Joshua's going through this whole big list And he says, this is what God's done for you. And he says, throw away the gods your ancestors worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt and serve the Lord. Joshua looks at him and he says, look, you need to understand, God has done so much for you. Be obedient and serve him. And then he comes to the verse that you know as famous. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And that's the verse we all know. But what you have to realize is before that and after that, there's a lot of really important information. Before that, the reason he says choose God is he said because God's been faithful to you. He looks at him and he says, look, God has taken care of you. God has done so much for you. We talked about this last week. He said, because of that, be obedient. Follow him. And then he comes in and he says, but as for me and my house, he said, I've already made the decision for my family. My family, we're going to serve God. So as he goes into all this, he kind of lays this thing out. But what's interesting is if you keep reading in this chapter, here's what you're going to find. The people respond by saying, yes, we will serve the Lord. Now, if you're Joshua, what do you say when the people respond that way? You get excited. You go, yes, good, that's what I wanted from you. You know what Joshua says? No, you won't. There's a whole history of you guys choosing other gods instead of God. No, you won't do it. And he actually gets into an argument with them. Because they're going, yes, we will serve God. And Joshua goes, no, you won't. Listen to what they say. Joshua said to the people, you're not able to serve the Lord. He is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sin. If you forsake the Lord and serve other gods, he'll turn and bring disaster on you, make an end of you after he has been good to you. Those of you who are in the Ladies' Bible thing, you're learning this in the exile thing and all of that's playing out. And one of the things that Joshua says, he says, look, you're not going to, he said, you don't understand. If you tell me you're going to follow God, you would really better follow God. Because if you don't, there's a high price tag that comes with it. And so he now starts arguing with these people. You know, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Yes, we're going to serve the Lord too. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're going to choose the other gods. No. So listen to this thing. The people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. He said, no, Joshua, you're wrong. We're going to serve God. And Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourself that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses. We are witnesses, they replied. Now then, Joshua said, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. He says, you really going to be serious about this? And the people are like, yes, we're serious. So this is what's interesting. Notice what happens next. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. So now Joshua, being the leader that he is, says, okay, then here's what's going to happen. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people. There at Shechem, he reaffirmed them, decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and he set it up there under the oak tree near the holy place of the Lord. Notice what happens next. See, he said to the people, this stone will be a witness against us. Listen to what he says. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. A stone with ears? The imagery here is powerful. It doesn't mean that the stone physically hears, but he says, listen, this stone is hearing. It is a mark. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. Then Joshua dismisses the people, each to their own inheritance. In other words, Joshua sets up this stone. And we're going to talk about it. But he sets up this stone and says, this is a reminder. Every time you walk by this tree, every time you see this stone, it's going to be a reminder of your promise to God. He then dismisses the people. They go their own way. The next couple of verses are basically a list of obituaries. Here's what it says about Joshua. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, dies at the age of 110. You know what his epitaph is? Not Joshua, great commander. Not Joshua, the one who fought. Joshua, a servant of the Lord. They buried him in the land of his inheritance, Timnath Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. There's another little couple of verses about the bones of Joseph that they had carried with them, and they buried them in the land. And then there's the death of one of the sons of Aaron, the high priest, the last one of the sons of Aaron. That's the story. A couple of things I think that stand out, lessons for us. One is this: you got to make a choice. I mean, you really do. You know, we talked about this a little bit in the testimony thing. It's hard sometimes to take a stand. It's hard to say something. Joshua looks up and says, I don't know about anybody else, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm serving God. My family, we're serving God. You and I have a choice to make. Every week, every day, we make a choice. Do we serve the gods of this world, or do we serve the Lord? That's it. You want to know what's interesting about Shechem? Abraham, you go back in the book of Genesis, Abraham builds an altar at Shechem. It's one of the first altars that's built in the Bible. Genesis chapter 12, I think. Then later, Jacob comes along. And one of the things that happens at Shechem is Jacob takes all of the false idols and the false gods that everybody was worshiping, and he has them buried at Shechem. So it's interesting to me that when Joshua gathers these people together, he gathers them at Shechem. Biblically, they would have related this to those two stories. This is a place where we worship God, and this is a place where we bury the gods of our enemies. And so Joshua, when he gets here, he says, look, I've made a choice. This is what my family's doing. And what I'd say for you and I, look, choose. Every day's a choice. You're going to live for God, you're going to live for yourself. You're going to live for God, you're going to follow the customs and philosophies and mindset of the world. Make a choice. And I think it's interesting because Joshua says, choose you this day. In other words, there was an urgency with it. Make the choice today. And I think every day we have to make a choice who we're going to serve. And that's a great reminder. The second thing is this idea of a memorial, I think, is significant. When you study this idea, you know, first of all, a rock that hears, that's kind of an amazing analogy or an amazing imagery that Joshua says. But he basically says, we're going to set this up, and it's always going to be a reminder to you every single time you walk by it. You said you would follow the Lord. This is a marker that's saying, this is what I said at this point. And they put it at Shechem, which was kind of the central worship area at this time for Israel. So what happens is it becomes a testimony. And this is what I'd say for us. I think it's important we have markers. I think it's important that we have some place that reminds us, if you will, of commitments and promises we made. I think that's, by the way, I think that's why in the New Testament, salvation, putting your faith and trust in Christ, is a private thing. Baptism is a very public thing. I think baptism, so to speak, is like the marker, if you will, that says, this is my commitment, this is what I've said, this is where I'm going with my life. It's something that's outward, it's something that is public, it's something that everyone can see. This marker was set up to say, this is public, this is, every time you walk by it, you're going to go. And and here's the other thing. You're going to be able to teach your kids that way. When your kids walk by and they go, "What is that, Daddy? What is that, Mommy?" Let me tell you about that. By the way, I think that's why when we have services in the cemeteries, Memorial Day, things like that, I think it's so important you take your kids to that. It builds that appreciation for the freedoms that we have. It's a marker. There's a marker. By the way, cremation is becoming a big deal now. I always get that question as a pastor a lot of times. Hey, is it right to cremate? I always ask people, why are you doing it? In the Old Testament, the Bible talks against it because it was a way to dishonor a person. By burning their body, you weren't. In the case, for instance, here in this story, in the case of Joseph, his bones were taken and carried for 40 years so they could be put back in a place of honor. If they wanted to dishonor him, they would have cremated him. So I always ask people, are you doing it to dishonor people? No, it's just a lot cheaper, and we can't get everybody here for the funeral, and blah, 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 blah. I always tell families the same thing. You know what? I don't think biblically there's an issue with it. I would say this. Put up a marker somewhere. Have a place that you can go that represents your life. I think that's the important part of it. With it. And, for the one thing that I do like about cremation is the idea that it allows everyone their own way to grieve. When I lost my best friend, just because of his physical condition, did a cremation. And I was able to take his ashes. I had some of his ashes, and I was able to find out a way for me to grieve personally with it. And so, again, they took a majority of them, and there is a marker in Highmore, South Dakota. I just want to challenge you with this idea of setting up a stone in your own life. Is there a place? Is there a marker? Because it was so important. Joshua in this book argues this at the end of his life. Serve God because of how faithful and awesome he has been to you. I talked about this last week. Everything we have is from God. You and I got here this morning because God allowed us another heartbeat and another breath. Everything is from him. When you are grateful, when you have a heart of gratitude, what naturally wants to flow out of that is a life of obedience. And that's why Joshua lists, that's why he starts this chapter by going, here's all the things God's done for you. I hope you have some kind of list like that. Where you step back and you say, this is what, we talked about this earlier, the reason I hate the fact that we don't get to do testimonies like we used to is because it was a way for us publicly to say, this is what I'm grateful for God doing in my life. And I hated to lose that, and as we got bigger, it's a logistics thing. So when we get a day like this where we can do it, I love it. I love it. And I would say to you, I hope coming off of Thanksgiving, you really have taken some time to go, this is what God has done in my life. And when you really, really embrace that, it's easy to get up every day and say, I want to live for him and make my life count. That's Joshua's challenge to us. So I end this morning with this idea. Joshua challenges Israel to make a choice. Joshua made the choice. And he determined that he would follow God regardless of what anybody else chooses. Choose to follow him this week. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for the day and the time. Thanks for all you have done for us. God, the fact that we have a place to meet, the fact that we have the ability to get here, the fact that we got out of bed this morning. God, I am so grateful for all you've done. Help us to live in such a way, Lord, this week, that it would reflect in our actions our gratitude for all you've done. These things we ask in your name. Amen.